President, earlier this week, we celebrated Veterans Day, a day we honor the sacrifice and the service of those who fought in Normandy and Pearl Harbor and in Shan and Quezon and Somalia and Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kandahar and Mosul and everywhere else that veterans work to protect our country. We owe them and their families a debt we often fall short in repaying, and that's what this is about today. For years, the VA has been presented with scientific information from the National Academy of Sciences, making it clear that the list of health conditions stemming from Agent Orange exposure is extensive. It includes hypothyroidism, bladder cancer, Parkinson-like symptoms, and hypertension. In the latest iteration of the Veterans and Agent Orange Exposure Update 11, published a year ago, the National Academies recognized that those illnesses, hyperthyroidism, bladder cancer, Parkinson-like symptoms, and hypertension, all have suggestive or sufficient evidence associated with Agent Orange. Historically, the VA has added illnesses in those two categories to the list of presumptive medical conditions associated with Agent Orange exposure. This Congress has bipartisanly done the right thing time after time after time. We're all on the same side when it comes to helping veterans who are exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. We recently found out that the former VA Secretary Shulkin decided to add 3 of these conditions to the list of presumptive medical conditions associated with that exposure, only to have OMB, the Trump administration, block his decision. An email to Director Mulvaney, Secretary Shulkin said adding these conditions was, quote, imperative. Yet no action took place. There are 83,000 veterans living with at least one of the presumptive medical conditions, 83,000. They're in Tennessee, they're in Georgia, they're in South Dakota, they're in Ohio. In a discussion with Blue Water Navy veterans last week, I learned that since the department put a stay on adjudicating their Agent Orange claims earlier this year, 12 veterans have died. Time is running out. Some might accuse this body of waiting till they all die. As hard as it is to say that and hear that, waiting till they all die before we move. We need to, for whatever political reason the administration seems to place on this, we need to ensure that veterans receive the health care and the compensation they earned. They shouldn't have to fight these one at a time when they are sick men and women, veterans of Vietnam. We did this to them. The American government decided to spray Agent Orange. We knew it was harmful. We know it's harm. We knew it then. We know it now. The chemical companies knew. The government knew. Why does the administration now, this administration, think it's okay to abandon our commitment to these veterans? If you are exposed to poison while serving our country, there should be no question you deserve the benefits you earned, period, no exception. Madam President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent. The Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of SRES 420, encouraging the President to expand the list of the Department of Veterans Affairs of presumptive medical conditions associated with exposure to Agent Orange to include Parkinsonism, bladder cancer, hypertension, and hypothyroidism, which was submitted earlier today. I further ask this resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there
Mr.
objection?
President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. And I want to say to my committee member from the Veterans Affairs Committee how much I appreciate his dedicated work in the committee. We've worked on a lot of things, including the diseases in here, and to getting presumptive conclusions done so we can cover as much as possible. But, you know, medicine is not exact. Diseases are not exact, and circumstances are not exact. But when you make a decision to include a benefit for our veterans, you're making a commitment to spend that money of the taxpayers of the United States of America. We just in the committee, and the gentleman was part of it, and he knows this because I helped him a lot, we just approved the Blue Water Navy funds, which is going to be one of the largest increases in history of veterans benefits going to our veterans. And we're circumventing in that some of the due diligence you really ought to do before you make a presumption that the disease is caused in all cases by that cost. So I am I'm an alumni of the Georgia Air National Guard and a veteran. I'm the chairman of the committee. I think the world of the gentleman from Ohio, and what he's trying to do is great and right, just as he was one of the leaders to help us get to where we got to on the Blue Water Navy. But I object to this motion as one who would benefit because I have Parkinson's. I went into service in the 1960s during the era that would be considered the Vietnam era. I didn't serve in Vietnam, but I was during that era. So I would have consideration, and if I got a Parkinson's disease, which I have Parkinson's, then they could use that as a conclusion to find out if it was presumptively caused or not by the exposure to what I had. So I'm just telling you as one who could, if he wanted to, take a benefit of this end run. I'm not going to do it because I think it's time that we start, as chairman of the committee, I think it's time we made sure that every benefit we promise a veteran, we have the money to do it. So we don't spend too much money on other people's benefits and leave ourselves short for theirs. And I object to the motion.
Madam President.
Senator from Ohio.
Senator Isaacson, the chairman of the Veterans Committee, knows, and this is no sort of false kind of flattery. He knows how much I think of him. He runs the most bipartisan committee in the Senate. I've been honored to be on it my entire 13 years in this body. No Ohioans ever served on this committee as long as I have, and I consider that a privilege, number one, and an opportunity to pay people back. I didn't serve in the military. I know that Senator Isaacson did. President Trump had deferments from Vietnam. He didn't serve in the military. I think maybe perhaps because I didn't serve in the military, I should work a little bit harder to make sure those people, most of whom were older than I by a little bit during the Vietnam War, that they be treated better than they were by the country, by the public upon their return from Vietnam, that they, in this case, get the benefit of the doubt. In the history of what happened with Agent Orange, you may remember years and years ago, veterans had to, people who had fought in Vietnam and been exposed to Agent Orange had to prove initially, case by case, why they got sick, which was darn near impossible, and especially when you're sick, trying to do that and go through that pain. Congress bipartisanly did the right thing. Back then, did the right thing, put a list of these illnesses together that people that Agent Orange was likely responsible for. And if you had one of these illnesses and you were boots on the ground in Vietnam, and you immediately automatically qualified. You didn't have to fight in court. You didn't have to get lawyers. You didn't have to do any of that. That was then. Now, even though Secretary Shulkin, and I don't know how many secretaries have come and gone, the president can't seem to keep secretaries of the VA or staff at the VA because of the erratic policy that he follows with veterans. The President of the United States goes to New York and makes a great speech about veterans, and we all applaud that. But then he's not willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. These are 4 illnesses that Secretary Shulkin thought, you heard the term I used earlier, the term that he used. He used the term that these conditions, it was imperative that we did something. And I understand as well as anybody how important it is to protect taxpayers. I also remember just 2 years, less than 2 years ago, Congress gave a tax cut, billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. Most of it, 70% of it went to the richest 1% of people in this country, and we can't come up with a few $1 billion to help veterans who are dying from these 4 illnesses. We can't expand this list and give them health care as we try to comfort them, as the VA in Cleveland and Dayton and Cincinnati and Columbus and Atlanta and all over. And this is no end run around process. This isn't 4 illnesses that I heard somebody talk about in Steubenville or in Cleveland that we ought to be covered. These are 4 illnesses the VA has looked at, the scientific community's looked at, the medical community's looked at. Secretary Shulkin, who served as Secretary of the VA, appointed by President Trump, initially was acting under President Obama. We can't give them the benefit. This is no end run, Madam President. We can't give them the benefit of the doubt and say, yes, we should cover this. I hope that the chairman of the VA, of the Veterans Committee, at some point we can sit down and talk and that he can reconsider. But why we think we need to protect President Trump, who, like me, didn't serve in the military, but for me it was, well, I won't get into that. But Madam President, why we can't help these veterans, give them the benefit of the doubt, cover these illnesses, and move forward in the VA taking care of people the way that we should.